a story of a young woman who literally risked her life to save the Jewish people. The gravity of Esther's actions are often drowned out by the overall story and the message of Purim itself. We often either read the book of Esther so lightheartedly that we miss some of the extremely troubling passages, or we read it so seriously that we lose sight of the playfulness of the book. Everybody get that? Right? The two problems of reading this book is if you read it too playfully, then you miss the seriousness of it. And if you read it too seriously, which is the way most Christians do, then they miss all the bizarre and the funny and the dramatic aspects of the book. To understand this, you need to understand that Esther is not your typical biblical book, okay? And I don't care what Hollywood or the latest faith-based movie says, right? This isn't a love story. It's not a romance. It's, you know what I mean? It's this interesting book. And it was because of many of these details, it almost actually did not make it into the canon, right? Because of these things. And it was the last book to be included. It was included very, very late. And that's why the book of Esther is not even attested to in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the only biblical book not attested to in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So what are some of these unique characteristics and themes within the book of Esther? What are we supposed to make sense of this biblical book? The first characteristic is this concept of what's called Hester Panim, of the hidden aspect of Purim. Throughout the book of Esther, and I'm trying very hard not to steal the thunder from my wife's study this afternoon, so I'm going to try not to talk too much about Esther, but we'll see how this goes. So throughout the book of Esther, what seems obvious is actually hidden. For example, there is no mention of God anywhere in the book. Not even once is God ever mentioned, and yet God is all over the place. Haman's connectedness to the Amalekites, who we're supposed to remember on this Shabbat, and a connection to a long history of hatred against the Jewish people is also hidden. For we are only told that he is an Agagite, right? However, you have to go back into the Haftarah, which Daniel read today from 1 Samuel, to realize the connection. That Haman is a descendant of King Agag, who was king of the Amalekites. Even the Jewish identities of the heroes are hidden. For the most part, these were assimilated Jews. Very, very different than the rest of the Bible. The rest of the Bible, all the heroes, it's made clear, are Jewish, right? Even especially in the apocryphal books, they go above and beyond to show that they are very faithful and zealous towards the Torah and faithful to the Jewish people. And yet, what are we told about Esther and Mordecai? Even their names are pagan. Esther Ishtar, right? She has a Jewish name, Hadassah, but that's not the name she goes by. Ishtar is a fertility goddess throughout the ancient Near East. And Mordecai, where do you think his name comes from? So the chief deity of Babylon is Marduk. So Marduk-Chai, right? Mordecai, Marduk-Chai made Marduk live. Right? It's an exaltation of the deity of Babylon. And we are told in chapter 2, 2 times about Esther, she did not reveal her people or her family ties. Nobody knew she was Jewish. She was just blending in. From the outset, they would seem like not the most likely Jewish heroes. We are told Mordecai, for example, is Jewish, but not once is there any mention of him ever being devout, ever observing the mitzvot, and which is also unusual for a book, a biblical book. And even their prayer and fasting in the story is the result of a foxhole situation, right? We're not told that they regularly fast and mourn. They're fasting and mourning because they're about to die, right? The Jewish people have the possibility of being annihilated. So apart from their role in the story, they were not exactly Jewish role models. However, throughout the book of Esther, what might seem the most obvious parts are actually the ones that are the most hidden. And things are not always what they seem. And therefore, it is our job to seek out the hidden truths of this wonderful book. In Proverbs 25, verse 2, it says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings to seek it out." And that's what you have to do with Esther. You have to dig a little bit and go beyond just the surface. So the first characteristic of this book is that the hidden aspects of it. The second characteristic of the book is everything is exaggerated. I want you to understand this. First of all, there's a party lasting 180 days. And then another party for another 7 days. Can you imagine a party that lasted for 6 months? It's literally on the side of ridiculous, right? Everything is on the side of ridiculous in this. There are bountiful gifts and holidays at almost every chapter. There is endless flows of alcohol. It says over and over and over again, they're just drinking and drinking and drinking. Also, we have the trafficking of beautiful young virgins from across the empire and a beauty pageant to be conducted in the nude. There is lots of sexual innuendo in the story. And the gallows that that Haman builds are over 75 feet high. It's like ridiculous. You don't need gallows this big. It's kind of what happens in Iran still to this day. It wasn't just back then. Does everybody see the way they hang people publicly in Iran? They do it from these huge cranes, right? Nobody else in the world goes stories and stories up to hang people. Because going all the way back into here, it's a sign for the entire community and a warning, right? Iran still does this. But it's ridiculous. Most of the time in the Old West, I'm not an advocate of lynchings or hangings, but they would just either throw a rope over a tree or they would build these low gallows. It's hard to believe. In our day and age, it seems weird that these used to be public events, right? Hangings. Also, there was an edict of extermination that went out to all 127 provinces, each in their own languages. Everything is bold and exaggerated in this story. Some of the measurements and the calculations mentioned are even almost to the point of absurd. So again, what are we to make of all of this? Purim teaches us that although everything might seem overwhelming and the odds stacked against us, we're never supposed to give up. And as overwhelming and crazy as it sometimes seems, God is still in control, even when it doesn't seem like it. The final characteristic I want to point out today is this idea. It's a concept we've talked about before called hipuch, of sudden reversal, right? That God often takes throughout the Bible the least likely scenario, right? And makes that the thing. It's the unexpected thing that turns out to be the norm. According to Rabbi Yaakov Asher Sinclair, he points out that the only difference between a tragedy and a comedy is the ending, right? When you think about the great Greek and the Roman tragedies or dramas, the only difference is the ending. The book of Esther is written in the classic style of a comedy. And the whole tragedy is turned upside down in the very end on its head. Haman is hung on the enormous gallows that he himself built. Jewish people are saved when faced with certain doom. Thousands of Persians convert to Judaism, right? And a Jewish girl becomes the queen of Persia, modern day Iran. The irony of the book should be evident, right? The least likely thing happens. One more thing. The courage of Esther. As I mentioned, hidden within the irony of this book is a serious message of courage and heroism, and the answer to why we celebrate Queen Esther. Esther's actions required a level of courage that is often overlooked. Within ancient Persia, the queen did not have as much power and influence as you might think. and especially when it came to Esther, because she was not really much more than a glorified concubine. In fact, when Mordecai is lamenting the decree to exterminate the Jewish people and goes to Esther to plead with her to intervene, she quickly becomes defensive, recognizing that attempting to do anything would put her own life at risk. Like, how dare you come to me? Because don't you understand? If I go to the king, which is unlawful, that person shall die. In chapter 4, verse 10, we read, "Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him the message from Mordecai. All the king's officials, as well as the people in the royal provinces, know that if anyone, man or woman, approaches the king in the inner courtyard without being summoned, there is just one law. They must be put to death, unless the king holds out the golden scepter for him to remain alive, and I haven't been summoned to the king for the past 30 days. Yet Mordecai responds with one of the most powerful messages of the story. Can you imagine it's been 30 days since she last saw the king? She's supposed to be his wife. Then in verse 12 we read, okay. Yet Mordecai responds with one of the most powerful messages of the story. In verse 12, upon being told what Esther had said, Mordecai asked them to give Esther this answer. Don't suppose that merely because you happen to be in the royal palace, you will escape any more than any of the other Jews. For if you fail to speak up now, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from a different direction. But you and your father's family will perish. Who knows whether you didn't come into your royal position precisely for such a time as this. And Esther finally responds in a moment of courage, and she says, okay, I'll do it. She finally built up enough chutzpah to say, okay, I'll do it. It says, and Esther had them return this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble all the Jews to be found in Shushan, and have them fast for me, neither eating nor drinking for 3 days, night and day. Also, I and the girls attending me will fast the same way. Then I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Then Mordecai went on his way and did everything Esther had ordered him to do. The British theologian Oswald Chambers theorized that heroes are not born in an instant. Rather, they are groomed over a lifetime to respond heroically when the moment arises. Whether assimilated or not, religious or not, Esther was raised with a certain moral and ethical value that are resurrected at this moment, these values. When Esther is confronted with what really matters, she builds up the courage to act. And she becomes the savior of a generation by doing the right thing even when it meant putting her own self at risk. But it was in that moment she became a hero. A Midrash teaches that in the Messianic age, when all other festivals will be abolished, Purim will remain. So the question is, why is this a teaching of the rabbis? Well, according to Rabbi Yaakov Asher Sinclair, the reason is because that is what it will be like with the coming of the Messiah. It will be a sudden reversal. Everything seems to be going one way, and then boom, it goes the other. When the Mashiach comes, he says, he will come in an instant and things will be turned upside down in a second, just like Purim. So what do we learn from this holiday? What do we learn from Purim? First, what often seems obvious is really hidden. Sometimes in life, we have to dig for real answers. Don't just believe what's on the surface, right? People are sending all kinds of messages they expect you to swallow. And one of the messages of Purim is maybe we should dig a little deeper, right? Sometimes in life, we have to dig for real answers. The second thing is, although life may at times feel overwhelming and exaggerated, God is in control. Even when it seems like he's not. Even when it seems like he is absent or hidden. Third, when the Mashiach comes, in an instant, everything will change. Therefore, we must always remain vigilant, always ready to greet our Messiah. And lastly, becoming a hero is something we are groomed for, but it is also a choice. Esther could have remained defensive. She could have just said, I'm not willing to risk my own neck to save all of you. It happens all the time. It's happened throughout history. And believe it or not, there were Jews, even in the Holocaust, who chose to side with the Nazis to save their own skin and ended up risking the lives of everybody else around them. We have a choice. In a moment that matters, you choose to do something rather than nothing. Heroes are born in a moment that matters, when you choose to do something rather than nothing. Esther, in a moment of courage, risked her own comfort on behalf of the entire Jewish people. That's what Mordecai says. Don't think you're going to escape, right? Even if you do, you and your family, your family is going to perish along with all the rest of the Jews. And she finally says, okay, I'll do it. I'll respond. The difficult thing that we have to ask ourselves is, do we have such courage? People that we often think of as heroes, they'll tell you, I was afraid. I wasn't sure I would do anything. And sometimes they're just as surprised as the rest of us. But the reason why we consider these individuals heroes is because in a moment that mattered, they chose to do the right thing, even if it costed them their own life. It was to cost them their own lives. When our own necks are on the line to do the right thing, what will we do? And not if, but when. Not if, but when the Jewish people are again facing certain annihilation, will you be a hero or one of those who are not willing to even risk their own neck? Courage does not necessarily take place in such harrowing moments. It also happens in hidden moments of our lives. And I pray that each one of us, in the most difficult of moments, always chooses to respond with courage. That no matter the circumstances, we are always people who act with menschkeit, who do the right thing, even though it might cost something. That we would respond to every situation not only with character, but with courage. Although Purim is often a lighthearted affair, the book of Esther itself deals with both lighthearted and serious issues. Yet at the same time, God, who is seemingly hidden in the book, is still at work behind the scenes. It seems so obvious to us, right? That's why it's so surprising to people to realize, gosh, I see God all over the story, and yet to realize God's never actually mentioned in the book. Because even when God seems hidden, he's really in control. At work behind the scenes. Purim is a reflection of our lives. At times serious, at times joyful, and at other times even downright bizarre. Yet through it all, we can trust that there is an overarching plan. It takes faith, right? And in moments of trial, Hashem is there to give us courage. On Monday night, just a couple days away, we're going to be right here at 6 p.m. to celebrate Purim. There will be our normal Megillah reading, a costume contest for adults and children. So I want to see you guys in your great costumes. There'll be games and activities, fun, food, hamantashen, and more. Fun and freilach for the entire family. So come ready to continue celebrating the deliverance of the Jewish people and a Jewish woman who in a moment made a courageous choice at the cost of her own neck. Chag Sameach, happy Purim, and we'll see you on Monday night. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King. I pray that we would be people like Esther and Mordecai. The kind of people that most people would write off. They wouldn't think of us as heroes. But in a moment, God, that we don't do it because we want attention, but that we would have courage. That we would have menschkeit to do the right thing, even if it costs us something. Being believers in Yeshua is itself at times a courageous act. It's so easy to want to just say, I'm not going to step up because I'm afraid of the risk that it would cost me. But at the same time, there are times, using wisdom and discernment, that we need to be able to stand up and say, okay, I'll do it. Especially in these times when, since the year 2016, anti-Semitism just seems to be exploding all over the country. And right here in Connecticut, the number of anti-Semitic incidents only continues to go up. But we have two major hate groups that are very active right here in our own state, right here in Connecticut. God, I pray that you would intervene and that you would use us to have courage to speak up. And not just in the bold acts, but when we hear little things. People make a joke about Jewish people or about any people, regardless of the color of our skin or the creed of our faith, that we would be bold to say, hey, I'm not cool with that. That we would stand up, even though it would be easier to just shut up. God, help us to be people of courage, like Esther, to do the right thing. We continue to pray for the power of your Brumbach, your Spirit within us. That is not just simply to make us feel good, but to empower us to do the work of the kingdom. And we pray all of this in the name of Yeshua. Amen.